Hey, good morning, everybody. Good to see you. It's nice to be back with you also. And man, we've got a great story for you today. Have you ever heard the phrase, "I've got your back"? Sometimes I say it to my friends. And whenever I whenever I think of that, I think of this funny picture, which is, as you can see, stick man holding another stick man's back. Poor guy doesn't have a back anymore. That's actually not totally what that means. But "I got your back" means like I'll take care of you, or like I'll make sure nothing happens to you. Today we're gonna talk basically about that, and the big idea is this: that heroes help others. And so I can remember this time when I was a little bit younger, and my brother and I got into a big argument. We used to play tennis together, and so we went to play tennis. We were like, goofing around, we're warming up, and before you know it, my brother, who's a little bit younger than me, hits the ball a little bit too far away from me. I get so frustrated. I'm like, "Come on, man, you've got to hit where I can hit it." So we try again. Couple more hits. He hits it further away, and we're just warming up. And I'm thinking, oh man, I was starting to get so angry. So before you knew it, my temper got out of control. I was like, "That's it. We're not practicing together anymore." I hop in the car, make him get in the car, and I start to drive back. On the way, I get even more mad because he's kind of messing with me, and it feels like he's being annoying. And so I just like dump him out of the car. I'm like, "You're gonna have to walk home," which was actually pretty far away. I get back home. My mom's like, "Where's your brother at?" And he was nowhere to be found. And I was like sheepishly like, "Well, he was making me mad. He was annoying me." And so I had to let him out of the car. My mom got super mad at me, and of course made me go back and pick him up. So it took me a few days actually to like really get over it. And what I needed to do to reconcile with my brother is really apologize, because I realized that I got way too mad, and unlike the big idea for today, I didn't have his back. I wasn't able to, even though I was older, I got so mad I didn't feel like I could help him or help us play tennis better together. Well, today's story is sort of about that, and about how even if we get frustrated with our brothers, God can still work through us and work through our faith to do amazingly cool things in our lives. Last time we talked, we left off where Joseph had been thrown in prison unjustly, and he'd been sold by his brothers. They got really mad at him and sold him, and he ended up in prison. He didn't do anything, right? And so that's where we pick back up. He's in prison, and he starts to, he's still being used by God, right? And so he starts to make friends and become somehow, people liked him, and he became kind of popular, and he had this really cool power that God had given him, and that was that he could interpret dreams. And so Joseph didn't know this, but at the same time, Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt at the time, had this crazy dream. And he goes to these super smart people around him, and he's like, "Hey, what's this dream mean?" And none of those guys could tell him. So he goes to some other guys, even smarter, like some magicians maybe, or some educational teachers and people like that. Nobody could tell him what the dream meant. But one of the guys that he asked said, "I know a guy named Joseph, and I've heard that he has started interpreting dreams, and he's in prison, but let me go get him." So the guy go gets Joseph. Joseph shows up to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh tells him this dream. And the two dreams that Pharaoh had were oddly similar, and so I'll tell you both, and then we can unpack it a little bit. The first dream was that there were cows, right? Moo cows like that, and there were 7 of them, and they were really big, hefty, healthy. It's like they'd been eating, Wheaties for breakfast and protein shakes the whole time. They were getting really big and strong. And then also there were 7 cows who were looked like they were sick and super skinny and hadn't eaten in days and days and days. And out of nowhere, the sick cows gobble up the really big cows. And that was the end of the dream. In the second dream that Pharaoh had, there were 7 stalks of grain, and those 7 stalks of grain were really full and plump and they looked great, like they could be harvested and they could be eaten. And then, out of nowhere, 7 really scrawny, bad looking, like they didn't grow very well or they hadn't been watered in a long time, stalks of grain showed up, and those totally devoured the healthy stalks of grain. And so Pharaoh was like, what in the world does this mean? And he asked Joseph what it meant. And Joseph said, I actually don't know what it means, but God knows and he can tell us. So this is what Joseph was saying. Joseph knew his powers were from God, and it was meant to help others, which is super important in this story. Even though Joseph could have been mad about being thrown in prison, he wanted to use the gift that God had given him to help other people. And that's what heroes do. And so he interprets the dream for Pharaoh. He says, okay, what it means is there's going to be 7 years in Egypt where everything grows super well, and all the cows and the sheep and the donkeys do super well. And then after that, there's going to be 7 years of what they call famine, which means nothing grows, there's not a lot of rain, and we won't have a lot of food, and actually all the animals will start to die. And so Joseph comes up with the idea that they will, during the first 7 years, when everything is going well, they're going to set aside portions that they have extra and put in a storehouse or however they're going to do it, right? Just have extra for the next 7 years. And so, sure enough, Pharaoh listens to Joseph, and he believes Joseph, and Joseph becomes like the second most important leader in all of Egypt, and he puts his plan into practice. He sets aside all the food, and then after the first 7 years, it starts to happen. There is actually famine, and luckily they listened to God's plan that came through Joseph, and all of Egypt was able to continue to have food. Now, what was crazy is the famine was not just in Egypt, but it was also happening all around Egypt. And so something crazy happens in that the place where Joseph was from also was experiencing famine, and so his brothers and his family started to run out of food completely. And so they had heard that in Egypt they had done the super smart thing to save up food and to be ready for the famine. And so they were like, man, the only way we're going to survive is if we can get down there. So they packed everything up. They packed all their families up, big, huge caravan. They didn't have cars then, but they were traveling and walking all the way down there. And when they got there, they were hoping that they could just beg for mercy and they would be able to get somehow food and a place to stay to survive the famine. And so what did Joseph do when he first saw them? They show up. They didn't even realize it was Joseph. They showed up in this palace where Joseph was in charge, and Joseph didn't even look like himself. And it had been so many years, he almost looked like he was Egyptian instead of Israeli, which is the family that he came from. And so what did Joseph do instead of taking revenge? Instead, he embraces them and he forgives them and he gave them food. And he does this. This is an example of Joseph being a hero that helps others. He didn't have to help others. He didn't have to help his family or his brothers, who definitely treated him unfairly, but he did it anyways because he wanted to be a hero. So how can you be a hero today just like Joseph? How can you help others and stand up for other people? Well, for one, helping people, you need to help people who can't help themselves. Are there kids at school who have it rough at home? Are there kids who on your sports team are picked on? Are you even potentially being bullied or picked on by somebody in your past? In these scenarios, like, heroes have to help others, period. They have to stand up and they have to forgive people, and they have to reach down and try to pick people up out of some of the darkest places that they're in. And so for you, think about 1 or 2 people that come to mind that might need help, and where is it that you can support them or help them. And one idea would be like those 1 or 2 people that come to mind right now. Maybe you reach out to them and invite them to sit with you at lunch. Maybe you, on your sports team, maybe you include them in the warm up and playing with them and making sure that you pass the ball to them well. Maybe every night before you go to bed, you say a prayer and you specifically mention this one person or these 2 people that God has brought to your mind. So how can you support them and how can you help? and how can you be a hero and help others. That's what is so important today. Heroes help others, and they especially help others who can't help themselves. And today you can be a hero. So I hope that this encourages you guys today. I hope this story was really cool, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.